In Stormweaver's Stronghold, you play with a Dwarven Ranger squad. Your task is to explore the forests, mountains, and hills near the newly constructed Stronghold and eliminate any threats to your people. The party members are Thorgrim the Warrior, Gandry the Mage, and Vidar the Techneer, Dwarven Engineer. The storybook allows you to traverse the open world and explore locations, and when combat occurs, the book tells you which battle map and which enemy figures to choose, and what the combat conditions are. In our scenario, the dwarves entered a shadowy valley where they encountered hostile storm wraiths. In this video, I will walk you through the combat. Each of the dwarves has their own deck of 5 sphere cards consisting of might cards, magic cards, or cunning cards. Strong Thorgrim excels in melee combat, Mage Gandry in magic, and Cunning Vidar in range attacks using his mechanical crossbow that he invented. Let's look at a sphere card. Each card has 3 sections: action, reaction, and movement. During their phase, a dwarf can use action and/or movement, while during the enemy phase, they can defend using reaction. However, each action has a cost, cooldown. If I use Mighty Strike action, which deals 2 damage to an enemy, I must rotate the card by its cooldown value, and the card becomes inactive. In subsequent rounds, I will rotate the card back by 1 until it returns to its starting position, and I can play it again. Therefore, the more powerful the action, the longer I must wait to use it again. Combat takes place in rounds. A round consists of phases: the dwarves phase and the enemy phase. Which of these phases comes first? It depends on the situation description in the storybook and your previous decisions. During the dwarves phase, each dwarf can perform 2 actions described on the cards. This action can be movement and attack, or 2 movements or 2 attacks. The player chooses the order in which the dwarves move. In this scenario, there's also an elven warrior participating, but for simplicity, I'll remove her from combat now. Let's start with Vidar. He can use Bolt Barrage action, attack up to 2 enemies in range 4, assigning the damage between them at will, but the nearest enemy is out of range. Therefore, Vidar must move first. For this, I'll use the Runes card, which allows me to move up to 2 squares and has a cooldown cost of 1. I'll move 1 square to get the enemy in range and rotate the card by 1. Now I'll use Bolt Barrage action, rotating the card by 3 to deal 2 damage to the Storm Knight. On the enemy card, I see that Storm Knight has armor class 1, so I'll deal 1 damage instead of 2. Next is Thorgrim. He has a powerful charge card. However, to use it, I must first get closer to the enemy. I'll use the mobility card to move 3 spaces with cooldown 1. Now I can use the charge card and Bull Rush action to attack Storm Knight with momentum and deal 3 damage instead of 2. However, since Storm Knight has basic armor, I can only deal 2 damage, which is enough to eliminate him from battle. Finally, Gandry. I want to use the Fire Magic card and Fire Missile action to finish off the weakest Storm Knight, but he's out of range, so I need to get closer first. I'll play the Mobility card with cooldown 1, which will allow me to move closer and throw a Fireball at the Storm Knight from the Fire Magic card with Strength 2. And despite his armor reducing damage by this, will be enough to send him to the afterlife. Let the Storm Knight move first. When we look at the enemy card, we'll see its stats. Level 2, therefore the enemy will use level 2 attack cards. Speed 2, therefore he will move 2 squares. Armor class 1, health points 2, range 1. To move the enemy, let's draw an attack card for him. The Brutal Attack card has the following stats. Damage 3, additional cooldown 1, which means that if the enemy wounds a dwarf, the card used by the dwarf for defense receives an additional cooldown point. Push 0, if wounded, the dwarf is pushed back by the indicated number of squares. The Storm Knight will move toward the closest dwarf and attack if able. His speed is 2, but the fight takes place in a bowl-shaped valley whose terrain slopes down towards its center. To move to a higher level, the Storm Knight must spend one additional movement point. Therefore, he can only move one square, which is enough to attack Thorgrim, attempting to deal 3 damage. However, the dwarf can defend himself using a reaction chosen from one of his active cards. Thorgrim will defend using the parry reaction. This will reduce the damage by 2, taking only 1 wound. However, due to the additional cooldown from brutal attack, he must rotate the card by 3 instead of 2. Range heavy attack. Stormmancer will strike with a purple lightning at the closest dwarf within range of 6 squares. However, all dwarves are in range, so the one with the highest value of inactive cards will be attacked. Let's count. Thorgrim has combat expertise -3, charge -2, and mobility -1. Total -6. Now Gandry. Fire magic -2, mobility -1, total -3. Finally Vidar. Quick shooting -3, runes -1, total -4. Therefore, Thorgrim will be the target of the attack. Purple light illuminates the valley for a split second as Stormmancer strikes Thorgrim with a magical lightning bolt, who defends himself with the Vanguard card and shield cover reaction, successfully repelling the attack. However, his action possibilities will be very limited in the next round. Finally, the last Stormmancer attacks. He will also attack Thorgrim. Let's draw an attack card for him. Brutal attack. Stormmancer has a special trait that treats every attack card as a range attack. Thorgrim is closest, so he will be the target. With a bizarre giggle, Stormmancer strikes Thorgrim with lightning, attempting to deal 3 damage. Runes is now Thorgrim's only active card, so he can only use the Aegis of Protection reaction, reducing damage by 1. Therefore, he takes 2 wounds. Additionally, the Runes card receives 1 extra cooldown, and the dwarf is pushed back by 1. He hits an obstacle, which is the raised terrain wall, so he takes an additional wound. He gets 3 wounds and his health points level has reached 1. And this is the end of the enemy phase in the end of the first round. The second round starts. At the beginning of the dwarves phase, their cards are refreshed. Each card should reduce cooldown by 1. The dwarves understood who poses the greatest threat to them. They will try to eliminate the Stormmancers, but first they need to protect Thorgrim. Therefore, Gandry will use the Gust of Wind action to push Thorgrim out of the Stormmancer's range. This can be done regardless of terrain height. Then Gandry will use the melee card for movement to move 2 squares up, wanting to bypass the knight and get closer to the Stormmancers. Vidar will move 2 squares using movement from the melee card with cooldown 1 to get Stormmancer in range. Then he will shoot with Harpoon, and he will use the rope to pull the Stormmancer by 2. That will cost him 2 cooldown. I think this is enough for you to understand the Stormweaver's mechanics. By introducing it, we wanted to increase player control over the battlefield and reduce randomness. But we haven't shown you everything yet. Upgrading sphere cards, collecting and using fate points, resources, and magical items expands the gameplay possibilities. We are very eager to hear your opinions. Please write comments and ask questions. We will answer them all. Follow the Stormweaver's Stronghold project and support the upcoming campaign. Best Dwarven greetings and see you soon.